Kimi Antonelli has been linked to a sensational debut in F1, and it seems like Mercedes are extremely satisfied with what they've seen so far from the tests he performed in Austria, and will continue to do so later in April as well. With Sargeant's performance being questionable week in and week out, the Grove-based squad might be open to a change that would propel the team into the points and give themselves a Toro Rosso-Verstappen-like environment. But with age being the main issue here, as well as Williams' statements that they don't want to serve as the Silver Arrow's breeding ground for talent, could Miami be the last race for Sargeant? Joe Saward, a very renowned and FIA-accredited journalist for more than 35 years, has a massive opportunity that Sargeant is already looking in the last races of his career. And after the race in Miami, which would of course come this weekend, he will be ousted and replaced with Kimi Antonelli. The young Italian driver has been making a lot of headlines, more than anticipated after Alonso's signing with Aston Martin, and there is no doubt that his future is in this sport. However, Wolff was careful when it came to hyping up the young buck and giving him a lot of hope, since he's yet to fulfill the ultimate criteria to join F1, and that is to be 18 years of age. For those of you who say that Verstappen made his debut at the age of 17 and became what he did, he's the exact same reason why the rule was introduced for drivers to be at the minimum age of 18 before they can enter the sport. However, Joe Saward believes there is an opportunity for the FIA to make an exception for Kimi if enough pressure is applied on the governing body. It's a situation from which both sides could benefit, because from where Williams stands right now, things couldn't get much worse. Sargeant is underperforming again, but this time it might not be his fault, given the fact that Albon has yet to score points and the crashes in Japan and Australia didn't help the team's financial situation, of course, as well. Another huge issue that would have to be authorised is the super licence of Kimi Antonelli, because he technically doesn't possess one and is not filling the criteria to drive for Formula One teams. Obviously, he needs a lot more experience in F2 because he came here directly from F4, and not many expected that he would have to be forced in this seat after Hamilton's departure. But if we are to see how the FIA handled a similar situation with Colton Herta, who was racing in another category, IndyCar, it's safe to assume that the governing body would be put under a massive test here, which they won't necessarily fail if they grant the super license to Antonelli, because he came through the Formula ranks after all and is not an outside hire from another category. Being one of the three teams that has yet to score points, along with Sauber and Alpine, Williams have a very tough period ahead of themselves, and the financial situation that I just mentioned might be one of the reasons why they won't be open for such change. For example, Sargeant is very tightly connected with the majority of the sponsors of Williams, such as Gulf, and with his departure, it's safe to assume that a lot of these financial investments will withdraw. Therefore, it would be up to Antonelli and Albon to prove that the team could finish in the points in a more consistent manner to attract new sponsors and go through an entire process of rebuilding, which was the case with Haas once they got rid of Mazepin, whose financial involvement with the team was much greater than that of Sargeant with Williams. The situation is not great for Mercedes either, and with how the situation unfolded with Alonso and Verstappen, there is no doubt that they would want Antonelli in that seat sooner rather than later. However, offering him a struggling car from 2025 onwards, when they desperately need a driver who would push them in the right direction with their experience, is the downside of this entire deal, which is why Mercedes are desperately pushing towards 1+1 contract offers to drivers like Sainz and Alonso, with the latter one denying it and committing to longer-term conditions with Aston Martin. However, with Sainz yet to decide about his future, the current drivers' market is being held by Mercedes, because they're the ones who have a legitimate empty seat for 2025, whereas Red Bull needs to decide what they will do with Perez, and Sainz needs to decide whether it's worth spending the prime of his career in a project team like Audi and not remain at the top of the competitiveness with Mercedes, even though the conditions might not suit him the best. Be that as it may, unless Verstappen decides that he wants to race for Mercedes, that seat is secured for Antonelli, and it's only a matter of time before the Italian will be dressed in the Silver Arrows suits. But as I mentioned earlier in the video, the team wants to make sure that the criteria is filled properly and that they won't rush him and overhype him into something that will ruin all of the talent. James Vowles, the team principal of Williams, has also opened up about the opportunity to have Antonelli drive in Williams and go along the way that Russell did, which would open up more freedom for Mercedes because they would be winning on both fronts. They would have a young and developing driver in Williams and an experienced driver in Mercedes who would be fixing all of the issues that the car is currently suffering from. When talking about this matter, Vowles raised his concerns about this move not being a guarantee like it was until now, because Williams has its own drivers that they're taking care of as part of their academy, such as Zach O'Sullivan and Franco Colapinto, who are both competing in F2 along with Antonelli, as well as Luke Browning, who is a young and promising talent in F3. Furthermore, he added, "From my perspective, I have no doubt that Kimi will be in F1. He has done incredibly well in his junior series, but that doesn't mean he'll be in Williams necessarily. I believe in investing in youth, but I'll take people on merit into the organisation. I'm fortunate enough to have 2 juniors myself in F2 and 1 in F3. We are starting to build a programme that I think is a sensible one to develop the next generation of drivers." In the case of Toto, he is in the position that you would hope. He is one of, if not the best teams on the grid, with a range of options available to him. So from my perspective, it's more about looking at what happens going forward. I have Albon under contract and Sargeant obviously under contract as well, along with juniors. So it's just a question of seeing how everything plays out across the next 6 months. But what is worth mentioning is that Williams entered the season with a lot of hope, and it is nowhere near where they hoped to be. After finishing P7 in 2023, many hoped they would be able to maintain this pace and score points early in the season to secure the midfield battle with the Racing Bulls. However, as of now, they are yet to score points and are in a severe financial loss due to the crashes that happened, which might be something that could push them towards trying out extraordinary talented drivers who are high risk, high reward types of athletes. If you are to look at Mercedes, their position is definitely difficult because they must bring a driver and are not necessarily out of options. But due to the issues they're experiencing with the W15, they are leaning more towards a driver who would have a better and more natural feel with the car that would help the team be nudged in the right direction. This is the opposite of Antonelli, who, although labelled to be the next Verstappen, would definitely need a bit more development time in F2 or at least a lower bracket team in F1, because not to take anything away from his incredible hype, he has still yet to prove that he's good in F2. I have to remind you, of course, that people were criticising Sargeant for finishing P4 and being the driver who got an F1 seat compared to drivers like Drugovich, who won the championship. So you can imagine what would happen if Antonelli finishes outside the top 5 with Prima and gets a seat in Mercedes or Williams. With all this in mind, the driver situation will be very interesting to watch in Miami, or more precisely after it. So there is no doubt that the Grove-based squad will have a lot of questions to answer, the most important one being the future of Sargeant. Is the team ready to take over a young and promising talent in Antonelli? And more importantly, is the FIA ready to make an exception to aid Mercedes in their mission of returning to the top of the grid as early as possible? What's your take on this entire situation? Let us know in the comments below, and once you do that, have a look at the video that's appearing on your screen right now.